Hi, I'm Sam Watson. This is part two of a lecture on concentration in kids. The first part was about how children concentrate differently to adults, and this is some solutions for scatterbrained kids. So in part one of the lecture, we talked about this distinction between bottom-up attention, so that's our attention being automatically pulled out kind of from the outside world, movement, sound, bright colours, edges, and this contrast between that and top-down attention, so voluntary attention, what we talk about when we're talking about concentration, which is how well we can choose what we pay attention to and what we ignore. And we also talked about how bottom-up automatic attention's early developing and top-down voluntary, we're in control of what we attend to, how that's a later developing system. And we already talked about as well how in a lot of ways this is all about what we love about kids. You know, this idea that children see what's there and adults see what they're looking for. And we already talked as well about how we think that this is really important for the fact that children are better at some forms of learning. So I gave as the example early language learning, where children actually outperform adults, just as it's also the explanation of why they find other forms of learning particularly challenging. But at the same time, though, you know, for people who are working with children, and even for your own parents at home as they're growing up, a lot of the what we're thinking about when we're raising kids is about helping them to become more adult-like, even though that loses some things, that involves losing some things just as it involves gaining others. So I haven't put if we want a child to concentrate better, because as I say, there's really kind of important advantages to how children concentrate differently. But if we want them to concentrate in a more adult-like manner, what can we do? So we're going to be talking about three different things. Firstly, we're going to be talking about two different sets of very different ideas, building from this kind of new idea that I've introduced to you about bottom-up versus top-down. So two different ways we can improve concentration. Firstly, we can understand bottom-up attention and think about optimizing an environment to make it easy to concentrate in. And secondly, we can think about top-down attention, and we can be talking about brain training to improve concentration abilities. And then I've also put in a bit about some research that I've been doing more recently on shared parent-child attention. So how children concentrate differently in the presence of an adult. So that's three different ways we're going to be talking about to potentially improve concentration in kids. Okay, so first of all, about understanding bottom-up attention. So this is from a study that Anna Fisher did back in 2014, and it was basically a very simple one, which is she took a typical kids classroom, which, like a lot of kids classrooms, have has got a lot of stuff on the walls, and she simply looked to the effect of taking everything off the walls, and then she videoed children while they're engaged in attention and learning tasks, and looked at how it affected them. Now, based on what I was presenting in part one, we know that bottom-up attention, so this is the capacity of the world to try to attract our attention through things like movement or bright edges or colour or noise. We know that those systems are very active in children at a time when their top-down capacity to say, you know, I don't want to pay attention to this, I want to pay attention to something else, isn't so well developed. So I already mentioned at the end of the last talk this idea that children spend a lot of their time in these very noisy, visually cluttered environments at a time when they're not very well able to cope with them. So she expected that children would actually be able to concentrate and learn better in this sparse classroom condition. And in fact, that's exactly what she found. So I haven't put the results up, but you can look them up in this paper. And she found that children were generally more focused on the task, as well as did better at the learning task in the sparse classroom condition compared to the noisy classroom condition. There's a whole load of other stuff to say, you know, for any early years teachers watching. There's a whole load of other things to say about this study, but I haven't got time for now. But, you know, basically we like that because this type of finding, because it's what we'd expect to find based on what we know about kind of children's brains and how they concentrate, and it's actually exactly what they found. So this idea that children are more likely to get distracted by irrelevant information also impacts on other aspects of language learning too. So for example, looking at really, really early learning, so babies learning language, So I've been talking about visual domains, so like clutter and noise and movement and edges in stuff we see. Yeah. As scientists, we also talk about kind of the same types of ideas in the auditory domain. So when I'm, listening to the type of thing I hear in any early years classroom, it's very rare for there just to be one person talking at once. There's normally like 20 different conversations going on. We spend a lot of our time in these types of environments. Yeah. As adults, I'm talking to someone in the canteen and there's someone else having a conversation there. And my brain is so well trained at lasering in on the speech stream from the person that I'm talking to and not paying attention to all these other auditory streams that I'm hardly aware I'm doing this task. Yeah, it's a really, really hard task. If you think about the sound that's actually hitting our eardrums, it's a mixture of all these different types of signals. Yeah, and our brains are very specialized at picking out one of the signals and just paying attention to that. Yeah, children's brains find it much harder to do this. Yeah, for lots of reasons, primarily that, as I say, their top-down attention systems just haven't developed yet. Yeah. So there's some interesting research suggesting that, for example, babies, if a lot of their early language exposure is in a situation where there's one person talking and there's, for example, a TV going on in the background, yeah, their brains find it much harder to pull apart these two streams, yeah, and that actually affects their language development, yeah. So children learn best when as much as possible of their early language exposure is one person talking against silence, yeah, because it makes it easier for their brains to pick out what is the speech from the background noise. Yeah. So this is an idea that I've talked about in two different ways. Yeah. The idea is that children whose brains are more bottom up, they're less top down, so they find it harder to choose what they pay attention to. Yeah. If we give them a clean signal to learn from, yeah, they find it easier to focus, yeah? So we talked about that in the auditory domain, comparing one person talking against silence to lots of people talking at once. Then we also talked about it in the visual domain in terms of like visual noise, yeah? If a child is, for example, doing their homework in a setting where there isn't much movement, edges, color in front of them, they will find it easier to concentrate. Yeah, if they're doing their homework in a setting where there's loads of edges, there's movement in their field of view. Yeah, even if the child really, really wants to be concentrating, they're having this constant push-pull between these automatic attention mechanisms I was talking about earlier, that, these little warning signals that say, okay, there's something interesting going on. So they're having this constant push-pull between what they want to be paying attention to and this stuff that's getting sucked in. So it just practically can make it easier to pay attention if you don't set yourself up in this setting of concentration, in competition. Yeah, I'm saying this as someone who did most of their homework as a kid in an environment that looked a lot like this. So I only worked this out quite late in life, so that's why I'm trying to share it with you guys. Okay, so that's a little bit about how we can understand bottom-up attention to try and optimize the environment to make it easy to concentrate in. Yeah. I'm now going to talk about how we can potentially have exactly the same effect in a very different way by thinking about top-down attention. So this is something I do quite a lot of research funded by the Medical Research Council and other people, looking at whether it's possible to train babies' concentration. Yeah, I won't go into all the details of why we're doing this, but just briefly, we're trying to develop preventative intervention. So when we've got a child who we're worried isn't going to go on to develop so well, we know that the earlier you start trying to fix things in development, in theory, the easier it is to fix them. So what we're trying to do is identify high-risk babies early in development and try and put them into an intervention to train their concentration as learning as early in development as we can. Yeah. So this is a computerized task. It looks like a computer game that we use to try to train concentration in kids. So basically the baby sees this on a computer screen. We're tracking from a camera just next to it. Soon we're going to be able to do it from the webcam in the top of any laptop. We're tracking where on the screen they're looking. And it's basically a 2D scroller. So basically, if I'm looking at this red guy here, I see a little animation and the guy is walking from left to right. And we see these distractors scrolling in from the periphery of our visual field. Yeah, as you'll know if you listen to part one of the talk, Movement in my peripheral visual field is distracting. We have these automatic attention mechanisms. So they want to look to the moving distractors. If they look to the moving distractors, we, in setting up the game, wanted to punish them. So we wanted to discourage them from doing that. Yeah. When we were designing the task, we spent ages trying to work out how we can punish babies for doing what we want to do. We started off by having a big red cross coming up and saying big like that. But it turns out that babies love the noise and will do whatever they can to try and get it. So we ended up just having the display freezing. Yeah, so babies don't like it when nothing happens. Yeah, so if they look to these moving distractors, the display freezes. Yeah, and so the idea is that the baby learns, and slowly they do learn that the way to progress on the task is just to keep their attention focused on this guy and inhibit the urge to look to these moving distractors in the peripheral field. I wouldn't recommend doing that at home yet. We're still kind of working on and testing and developing these ideas. One thing I would recommend doing at home is meditation. And there's an exercise in meditation that's actually quite similar to this game. Obviously, it looks very different, but it's actually quite similar. And it's called candle gazing. And basically what you're doing is you look at a candle and you think, I mustn't blink, I mustn't blink. Yeah. After, 10 or 15 seconds, our eyeball gets dry and an automatic blink reflex kicks in. If you're thinking just that one thought, I mustn't blink, I mustn't blink, I mustn't blink, you can inhibit this urge to blink. And people who are really good can do it for like 2 or 3 minutes. They have tears streaming down their face. People like me who are not very good at it, you manage it for about 20 seconds and then you start to think, oh, I wonder how long I'm going to manage to do this. And then you blink before you've realized it. Yeah. So the common thing between this and the game is this idea that I mentioned again in part 1 of the talk about shuttering down your attention. So I use this metaphor of an attentional lantern. Yeah. So you really focus down your attention to something really small. Yeah. In this case, it's this thought that I mustn't blink, I mustn't blink. Yeah. And in this, it's this idea, look at the red guy, look at the red guy. So you're in this sense, you're physically shutting down your attention just to one corner of the screen, and you're inhibiting this automatic urge to look to these distracting areas around. Yeah. Yeah, it's a little bit like, again, I mentioned in part 1 of the talk, I had 2 cauliflowers up, one was moving and one was still, and I was trying to get you to look just at the still one. And again, you can do that if you're just thinking, look at the still one, look at the still one. But the minute your attention flickers for a second, then your eyes flick over. Yeah. So there is quite a large evidence base now for meditation. Stronger with adults. There is some evidence with children. So yeah, that, as I say, is something that I would look into doing at home if you're interested. So that's a little bit about 2 attention systems. How we can understand the 2 different attention systems to look at how we can use them in a very different way, potentially to have the same effect of improving concentration. I'm now just last part going to talk about some research that we're doing quite a lot of into shared parent-child attention. So we're doing stuff where we actually record brain activity in the parent and child at the same time. We know that children are much more attentive when they're doing a task together with an adult. And we also know long term that children who spend more time engaged in one-on-one tasks are better at controlling the focus of their attention later on. So we're trying to understand the mechanisms for why this is. So one of the things that we think, and I haven't had a chance to talk about this yet, but we've done some other research on this as well, is this idea that how we pick up on each other's moods. Stress and relaxation are contagious. So if you're stressed and you're around and your kids are sitting in your lap, then they will become more stressed. There's some really nice research from Sarah Waters looking at that. But the same thing's for relaxation. So if you're calm and focused, then your mood will spread itself to your kid. You're naturally better at paying attention, not because you're better or cleverer, just because your brain has developed, as I was saying in part 1. We're influenced by the patterns of people around us. We know that. So naturally, the way that you're paying attention will naturally influence the kids. Yeah. So, for example, if you're doing some Lego together and you're looking for a blue piece, you will find it easier to keep that in mind. We're looking for the blue piece. And then, as you're looking around, and that will influence the child as you're doing it. Yeah. But it's not that simple. for reasons I'm about to explain. So we know we've had a big shift generally in education from, the way I learned when I was a kid at primary school. I remember, the teacher would write out a long passage on the blackboard about a Tyrannosaurus Rex and we copied it down. Yeah. And so we've had a shift from learning that way to a much more interactive style of learning where we try and encourage the people we're teaching to ask questions and that kind of thing. Why? Just simply because there's been a lot of research suggesting that interactive learning is a more effective way of teaching people things. So even with a baby, if you get them to point at an object before you present the word label at an object, then they remember that word label better. So it's just a more effective way of teaching, yeah? So the example I just gave of how you're naturally better at paying attention, and in paying attention the way you pay attention, you will influence them, yeah? That's like the copying the book from the board, yeah? You're showing them how to do it, and then they basically follow the way you're doing it, yeah? Which is good, but it's not necessarily the most effective and certainly not the only way to do it. So how do we do a one-on-one in an interactive way, yeah? And it's actually really, really hard to do. If you've actually tried to do something like Lego or a puzzle together with kids, in the way I'm about to tell you to do it, is really, really tricky, yeah? So you're not just saying, okay, I'm the grown-up, I know how to do this, you follow me, yeah? Your eyes are constantly flicking between the puzzle and their eyes to see what they're looking at, yeah? You're trying to see which of the pieces that they're interested in, and if they are interested in it, you pick it up and you help them to stay focused on the thing that they want to be focused on anyway, yeah? And there's three-way sharing of attention. It's really, really tricky to do, yeah? So what you're doing is you're seeing them start to develop an interest, and then you're helping them to sustain their attention onto it for a longer period of time than they otherwise would, yeah? And so, yeah, so that's the idea. As I say, it's really, really tricky. It is at the moment, we think, the most effective way of, encouraging a child to be more attentive during one-on-one time. Yeah. So that's all I got for you now. So three ways that we talked about, three very, very different ways that we can potentially be helping children to concentrate in a more adult-like way. We can be minimizing distractions in the outside world. We can be doing brain training to improve the brain's top-down control. And then we can be thinking about spending more one-on-one time doing shared tasks with children and being very, very careful about how we do that. Okay, great. So any questions, email me or get in touch via Twitter. And then the next lecture in this series is a little bit more on emotions. So emotions in kids, how stress affects concentration. Great.